I'm wearing my Christmas pajamas still, but I did put on a real top for y'all. Feel blessed. Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary. Today's video is going to be my April wrap up. Let's just jump into these books. I didn't do stats this month. I know that that's either disappointing for you or you really literally don't care about my stats at all. I do know I listened to most of these things on audiobook. I read 11 books. I'm going to talk about them here. I'm still going to go through them in the order in which I enjoyed them and go through my ratings with you and how I felt about everything and like why I felt the way that I felt about everything like I usually do. I just don't have all of my compiled stats. My least favorite thing that I read this month was actually Feed by Mira Grant, which I gave 3 stars, excuse me. And this is a zombie book. So it's a YA dystopian sci-fi book set 20 years after zombie apocalypse has hit. And we're following the crew of this like online news source. So it's basically like bloggers are as credible / more credible than like actual news sources because of the way things are going. Sorry, my hair is distracting me right now. Bloggers are like the more accredited news sources, and we're basically following this girl Georgia and her brother, who I believe is like not actually her brother, but they were raised together because their parents were both killed. Like both pairs of their parents were killed by zombies at some point during the last 20 years. And so they've been raised in this like post-zombie world. What I really enjoyed about this book was that it talked about how this virus that got out, everyone has a little bit of the virus inside of them, but it activates after you die, and that's what turns you into a zombie, which I thought was like an interesting take on it. But Georgia, her brother, and their like news crew is following around this presidential candidate. So it's very politically heavy as a book, and I just didn't super love it. I didn't dislike it by any means. I don't know if I'm going to continue in the series because I do feel like the first book stands pretty solidly on its own. Like it had a complete arc, and I don't feel like I necessarily need more from the story, but I wouldn't count out me ever continuing it, if that makes sense. The next book that I read was the first book in a duology called The Forgotten Gods duology by Marie Rutkoski, and it was The Midnight Lie. I gave this 4 stars on Goodreads. I can't figure out why. I think I'm going to lower it to 3 because I think I liked this book less than I liked Feed. And this is a like fantasy romance. It's YA fantasy with a heavy romantic subplot. Pretty much the whole plot is this YA fantasy plot, but it's just set, or this YA romance plot, but it's just set in this fantasy world. This is set in the same world as Marie Rutkoski's other series, The Winner's Trilogy, which I personally adore that series. I really liked those books. This one didn't quite hit for me the same way. It's sapphic, which was nice, and we basically follow this girl who is living on this island, and the island has just discovered that there are other people in the world and that the island isn't like a standalone thing. And this girl at one point, like, she's in the lowest class of this society, if you will, and she finds this bird that may or may not be magical, that belongs to someone of a higher class, and she finds it and returns it to the police to be like, hey, I found this bird. And the police say, no, you didn't, you stole the bird, so they put her in jail. And in jail, she meets this person named Sid, and at first she thinks Sid is a boy, and she develops this crush on Sid, and then she realizes that Sid is a woman when they get out of jail. She thinks Sid is a boy, by the way, because Sid talks about how Sid was thrown in jail for having an affair with some guy's wife. And so Sid is gay, and we figured that out. And then the like low-class girl ends up, Sid hires her to be her like handmaiden in this world, and Sid is a traveler from somewhere else. And so we get to see the world through that lens, sort of. But this is, again, a very heavy romantic plot line, and it ends on a cliffhanger. And I don't know if I'm going to read the second one. I might, if I find it as an audiobook, if my library has it and I need something to listen to, I might listen to the second one. But again, I didn't really care that much, to be honest with you. So while I do totally recommend the Winner's Trilogy, if you're into that kind of thing, Midnight Lie didn't really do it for me. The next book, this is my first 4-star that I will say. House of Sky and Breath, which I read as part of a vlog, so I will link that. It's over here. I always point that way, but it's over here. It's the second book in the Crescent City series, which is like fantasy romance, basically. We follow this half-human, half-fae Bryce, who is sort of like coming into her own. In the beginning of the first book, this really tragic thing happens to a group of her friends, and she gets like roped into solving this mystery and this crime with a fallen angel of the city named Hunt. This world has, it's a an urban fantasy world, but it has like pretty much every creature you can imagine. And there's like mer people, which you get to see a lot more of in this book, which I thought was cool. But I think Elias from the channel Elias mentioned this, but this is like one of the worst written Sarah J. Maas books I have ever read. Like I've read 4 of her books now, and I like adored Crescent City, the first one, House of Earth and Blood, last year. I loved it. This book, just something about it was off. It was like weirdly paced, very repetitive, and even like, I don't know, it just was, there were some really strange elements thrown in that I wasn't a super big fan of. I don't want to spoil anything, but like the way certain like magical things happened in this book, I thought was weird. I will say my jaw was on the floor when this book ended because of the tie-in that happened. So I was amazed by that. If you know, you know. If you don't, you don't. The girls who get it. The girls who don't. But I like will continue in the series because of that. But I didn't love this book. I thought it was like way too long too. Like the first book had a lot of like world building, but it was mostly like, what do they call it? Like dumping, world dumping. I don't know what that's called. Hi, editing Mary here. It's called info dumping. So I'm going to call it world dumping, magic dumping, pretty much any kind of dumping you can think of, but I mean info dumping. Okay, great, thanks. I didn't mind because I was pretty new to fantasy at the time that I was reading it, and it was my first Sarah J. Maas book, so I like kind of needed the, what is that called? World dumping? I don't know. Magic dump? System? I don't know. I didn't mind that one. And also that book had like a bunch of things had to happen before like the actual plot of that book happened, because you needed some sort of setup. And I was glad that Sarah J. Maas didn't do like a setup book, because she could have just as easily done that, but instead she just made it like the first 150 pages of the first book, which I personally appreciated. But the second book did not need to be as long as it was. It could have been under 500 pages, and I don't think we would have lost anything. So that's never a good look. But I mean, some people really liked it. I just was not one of those people. It was like a 3.5 to me, but I rounded it up to 4 because I'm kind. The next book on this like order of enjoyment is actually the first book that I finished this month, and that is Hot and Badgered by Shelly Laurenston, which is the first book in the Honey Badger Chronicles, which is like paranormal romance. They are shapeshift romances between, I believe, all of the books. There's 4 books, so I don't know who all of the characters that they follow are going to be. But this one centers around these 3 sisters who are not actually related. They were just raised together. And all of them are at least half Honey Badger shifter, which is why they're like the Honey Badger Chronicles, I think. I will not lie to you. I got a little confused as to which sister was mixed with what, because they all are like mixed with different types of things and different shifting abilities. Like I think the main girl in this one is half wolf, half Honey Badger. But her love interest is a grizzly shifter. And so he's got that like teddy bear persona. He's like this big guy. There's also like organized crime in this world. This is set, by the way, in our like human world, and humans don't realize that shifters exist, which I will say is a lot to buy into, but these books are fun. They're not like, there is some smut, but it's not like so steamy. So if you're not super into like really steamy books, this could be a good entryway. But it's still like not fade to black, if that makes sense. So I enjoyed this book. It's part of a wider world of shifter trilogies or shifter series, which I don't think I plan on reading, but I would be interested to pick up another one of these, but I don't necessarily like have the itch to do it right now, but I might someday. So the next book in order of enjoyment for me, this is going to be a weird one because I don't think I can highly recommend this to a lot of people, but I really enjoyed my read of it, and that was the book of Joan by Lidia Yuknavitch. This is a sci-fi dystopian, but it's also like a piece of feminist literature. It's very short. I think it was like 200 pages. Oh, 280 pages, so it's longer than I thought, but relatively short compared to what I usually read. And it's set in this like futuristic society where Earth can no longer support human life, but before Earth fully died, people started devolving to where we could no longer reproduce. And so there's like this AI type thing that's in charge of these space shuttles that's trying to figure out how to get more life. But there's also this, I feel like I have to describe a lot of what's happening, but it's not like hard sci-fi. So it's like very poetically written. For the first like half of this book, or probably first third, I thought this was going to be a 5-star read for me just because I loved the way it was written and the things that the author was saying about like what it means to be human and how such a strong part of like womanhood and humanity is your like physical being. Things like lust and love and the relationships you choose to form. Really strong friendships. She focuses a lot on like lust and a lot on friendship, which I thought was interesting. There's not a whole lot of like romantic love involved, but I really enjoyed the way that parts of this were told. The major like plot, like the reason it's called the Book of Joan is because on Earth there is this like almost mythologized girl who fought during the big, like the last battle basically before Earth was deemed uninhabitable anymore, and she pretty much like gave her life for like a natural life, if you will. I don't even know how to explain it. This book is kind of confusing and not very solid, if that makes sense. Like it's not super plot driven, it's not super accessible, but I do think that like if you have time to like sit with it and process it, I think you would enjoy it. Also, I think if you liked that sci-fi book that came out a couple years ago, I read it last year. What is it called? This is How You Lose the Time War, or This is How You Win the Time War? I can't remember. If you liked that book, I think you might also enjoy this book. Plot-wise, not super similar. Writing style-wise, kind of similar in that you aren't really given that much like concrete story. But I don't know. This book is like very gross and almost obscene in the way that it's gross, but it's like just very cut. It's cut and dry, but it's also like beautifully written. I don't know how to explain it. If you've also read this, maybe you will know. But I really, really liked that book, and I want to read more by Lidia Yuknavitch because of it. It was super good. Next book I'm going to talk about is a nonfiction that I read this month, and that was The Feather Thief by Kirk Wallace Johnson, which is a nonfiction. Bear with me, this is going to sound really boring, but I actually really enjoyed this book. It's about a heist that this guy did. It was an American dude who was studying flute, I think, at a conservatory in London, and he was like obsessed with fly tying, which is kind of like an art form. I don't really know. I think it has to do with fly fishing, but you can tie flies without being a fisher. I don't really know. I Googled it. I recommend that you also Google it so you can see what some of these things look like, but they use feathers to create these like things. And this kid was really into that. And so I think he was like 21 at the time, and he broke into a museum, into the like ornithology department of this museum, and stole 500 exotic bird skins to then sell the feathers to the fly tying community. And he never served any jail time for this like heist. And that's one thing that I thought was really interesting. The book goes into like other museum heists that have happened and the like relative lack of punishment for people who break into museums and steal things. And it also talks about his like motivations, because he wasn't really motivated by money. Like he was motivated by the fact that he loved this art form and thought it was unfair that these birds were basically, killed in like the 1800s and had been preserved and tagged and kept in drawers in this museum's back room to where no one was even seeing them. So it was just like his justification for why he did it, I thought was really interesting. I don't know. I really liked this book. I read it, or I listened to it as an audiobook, and I recommend listening to it if you feel inclined to, because I thought it was like very interesting. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Loveless by Oseman. I also watched Heartstopper this month, but I'm not going to talk about that right here. Let me know if you want to see a video on Heartstopper, because I've seen a lot of people do the videos, and I could do that. But also I don't really feel like it's necessary because a lot of people have done the video. But if you want to see it, I will make it. Disclaimer. But Loveless by Oseman is another like YA contemporary. This one's a full-length novel, so it's not a graphic novel. And it's about this girl who pretty much is discovering her sexuality and that she might be on the A spectrum while she's in college. We follow a lot of her not romantic relationships. We follow a lot of her friendships and her like dalliances and struggles with wanting a romantic relationship, but also not really wanting a romantic relationship, just feeling like she should want that. And like how the difference or she talks a lot about the difference between like what she wants because she's like always seen that represented to her versus what she like actually wants. And it's just, it was a really good book. I really liked it. I didn't love all of the conflicts and the way they were described in this book. They didn't all feel super legitimate or like realistic to me. But that being said, I thought it was a good book. I miss being a freshman in college, so I definitely like tugged at some heartstrings there for me, like living alone for the first time or away from home for the first time, things like that. So I did really enjoy this book and I recommend it. Now we're getting into my 5-star reads. I had 4 5-star reads this month, which is kind of a lot. So the first one that I want to talk about is actually a nonfiction graphic novel. It's a memoir called Dancing at the Pity Party by Tyler Feder, I think is how her last name is pronounced. And it's about grief and her mother dying, basically. So this is a book about her experience. I think it's 10 years on or something like that since her mom has died. And she's just talking about like finding out her mom was sick because her mom died from cancer, and finding out or going home and being with her mom for that last bit. She talks a lot about like the guilt you feel when someone you love is so sick and can't be the way that you remember them always being in the way that you always loved them. So you're like not wishing they would die, but like when they do, it's almost a relief. Which I really enjoyed the way she told the story. I loved the drawings in here. Definitely a 5-star memoir, and definitely something that like I could see helping someone who is trying to go through grief, if that makes sense. The next book I want to talk about is a new release. I read this as part of a vlog, which is upcoming, I believe. I don't think the vlog is out yet. It's definitely not out yet. But A Far Wilder Magic by Allison Saft, which is a YA fantasy. This was going to go on my 5-star predictions, and then I knew I wasn't loving YA. So I was like, I'm going to not put it on there. I didn't call that video 5-star predictions, but I'll link it for you. It's like all the new releases I'm looking forward to. Is it going to be over here? I don't know. But this book was so good. I really loved it. Like, I want to read the other stuff by Allison Saft now. I think she's one other novel out or coming out. I don't know. Because this might be a debut. I'm not entirely sure. But this is, again, a YA fantasy. And it's about this girl named Maggie and this boy named Wes. So they've got like a little bit of a romantic relationship that's sort of developed throughout. But the premise of the book is that Wes is trying to be an alchemist, but no one in the city will train him because he has the equivalent of like dyslexia, so everyone thinks he's dumb. He can't pass these tests. So his last shot is to go out to the country and be tutored by this woman. I can't remember her name, but she ends up not being there, and it's her daughter Maggie that's home. And Maggie's brother died and her father left when her brother died, and since then her mom's been like really absent from her life and has sort of always traveled because she's trying to find the ingredients to make the Philosopher's Stone to bring her brother back to life. So mom's not home, the alchemist in the house, but Maggie is a sharpshooter, and there's this thing called the Half Moon Hunt that hasn't been to this town in like 150 years. But essentially what it is there's a fox that is actually either a demon or a god, depending on who you ask and like which religion you belong to. It's called the Hala, and it can only be killed during this like half moon period. And it's in the town that they're in right now this year. So she wants to join the Half Moon Hunt because she thinks that if she can kill this Hala, her mother will come back. And she gets Wes to join her because you need to have a team of 2. It has to be a sharpshooter and an alchemist. And she's the sharpshooter, and he is sort of an alchemist, enough of an alchemist that she's going to call him an alchemist. I really loved this book. It's not super heavy in the fantasy elements, which I appreciated. It's pretty dark at times, which I also appreciated. And I just think it was good. I think it was good. The next book I'm going to talk to you about is another book that I read for a vlog. This is the vlog that I read that's already up, and I will link it for you. But I also read House of Sky and Breath in this vlog. But this is Sundial by Catriona Ward. And I went back and forth on how I felt about this book for a long time. I wound up giving it 5 stars because I kept thinking about it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, like, even though I don't love this nearly as much as I loved The Last House on Needless Street by the same author last year, I still think this was like an incredible book. It was just very different, and I had to sort of separate them in my mind, if that makes sense. So in this one, we follow a woman named Rob, who is in an abusive marriage, and she has 2 daughters. And her older daughter, something weird happens at the beginning of the book or towards the beginning of the book. And Rob starts to be afraid of her older daughter and like what Rob's history might have been passed down to her. And so Rob takes her oldest daughter to this ranch called Sundial where she grew up and is going to tell her about her like family history. Definitely, everyone mentions this, but there is animal cruelty in this book. I didn't think it was that bad personally, but I'm also not a person who gets like really triggered by things. There's like very specific things that have to be like very specifically written for me to be like uncomfortable by something, or like not uncomfortable, because I mean, a lot of things are uncomfortable, but like actually affected by it, if that makes sense. I've got a pretty strong stomach. So, but I will say the animal cruelty in this book is more in like a lab setting. Like there's experimentation on the behavior of these animals. That's like mostly what it is. So I recommend this book a lot. If you can handle it. Look up the other content warnings too, because I'm sure there's other stuff. But like, it's really good. And then my favorite book that I read this month was Ophelia After All by Racquel Marie, which is shocking to me because it's a YA contemporary. And I've been seeing all year that YA contemporary is getting like 3 stars for me because I'm not that interested in it. However, am I ever interested in this book? So this is about Ophelia, who is a half Cuban American, half white girl who's 17 or 18 when the book starts. She's a senior in high school and she's about to graduate. But before she graduates, she has to go to prom. She's really into gardening. She's got like all of these really interesting like hobbies and stuff. Like she's like a very well-developed character. And there's sort of a drama going around with her friend group because 2 of her guy friends are in love with one of her girlfriends. And so that's like kind of a whole thing that she's having to deal with. And she starts to develop feelings on another girl in her class who sort of starts hanging around them because they have like a friend in common. And then things sort of go awry with that, especially because Ophelia is like trying to figure out herself, but also she thinks she still likes her ex-boyfriend. And there's just this whole thing. What I loved about this book is it felt so realistic in how like the teenagers were depicted, but also in how they like handled their business. It felt very age appropriate to me. And also very like, just like realistic in the conflicts. Like when I was talking about Loveless, I mentioned that some of the conflicts felt so unrealistic, but it was almost like certain things would happen and you would just want to yell at the book. Like if you would just give that person 5 seconds to explain what's going on, then they could explain it and it would be fine. Which maybe is realistic for some people, but for me, every time I read stuff like that, I'm like, you're really just going to get mad at them and have no, like, never wonder why they acted that way. I don't understand that. But this book was a little more like, I felt like the reasoning was better for why Ophelia wanted to like not say anything about what was happening. And like all the parts that came into play made more sense. There's also some conflict with like her and her parents that they have to work through, which I really enjoyed reading because like who doesn't have conflict with their parents, especially when you're 17 or 18, you know? And it was just really good. I loved it. I think it's probably going to be in my top 10 of the year. That's how much I enjoyed that book. But that's it. Those are the 11 books that I read in April. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it to this point, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Leave me a flower emoji down below for Ophelia because she's obsessed with florals and roses specifically. So if you want to leave me a rose, that would be awesome. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.